Hello and welcome to our critical thinking course. Today we are covering chapters 9 and 10. In chapter 9, asking questions is a great way to be less dumb, which is important because you are dumb, and so am I. Anytime we're not experts at something, we are at least somewhat dumb about the topic. When we ask questions, we fill in the gap in our knowledge, and that makes us less dumb. Now, if you have the speaker or the author available to you and can ask them these questions directly, that's great. But very often we don't have that, so it's just you and the text. And that means that you have to answer the questions on behalf of the author. And this is another reason we have to read charitably, because otherwise we are much more likely to misrepresent ideas as we are trying to answer questions about them. Some answers will be easy, others will be hard, and some will just be completely missing because the author does not give you any information with which you can answer the question. We'll get to that later, but for now, let's look at the questions. They come in three general varieties. So first up, we ask for clarification. Clarification is about making sure that we understand what's being said. And if we're not clear on what the claim is, or what its justification is, or what the validity is supposed to be, we can't really agree or disagree because we don't actually know what's going on. And all the questions in that section are aimed to make sure that we actually understand what's going on. The second group of questions deals with conditionals, which is all about making sure that we are thinking about what it means if the claim is true or false. And here we have a few subcategories as well. One of them, the rules and exceptions, are important to know and distinguish because they don't work the same way. For example, if you mix up whether it is legal to kill another person as a rule or as an exception, you get very different societies. Finally, in terms of evidence, our third group, I just want to draw your attention to the difference between possibility and probability portion. Let's imagine that you hear something break in a room where a 7-year-old is playing by themselves. You go in there and the kid says, "I don't know what happened. I was just playing nicely and suddenly the TV screen just broke." Now, it is possible that the TV did just shatter on its own, but is it more or less likely that the kid was flailing around and hit the TV hard enough to break it? Lots of claims are built on evidence that may make them possible. See the aliens guy? But not as many are built on evidence that makes them probable. So when you have a claim that you could take one way or another, always go with the more probable option unless you have enough evidence to definitively point you in the less probable one. In chapter 10, we looked at two Chinese terms. The first one is zhengming. Now, definitions are crucial. We often assume that we share meaning because we use the same words. But we often use those words to mean very different things. So nailing down exactly what we mean is critical, or we're not talking about the same subject. It's like having a whole conversation about Sean, only to find out at the end that you and the other person were talking about a completely different set of Seans. It makes communication very difficult, so that's always our step one. Now this way, when the other side is using terms differently than we might, we can still understand what they mean, and we can still see if their justification is valid for that claim. In this way, you could have a Hindu and a classical Greek who would be able to have a conversation about Egyptian religions, despite the fact that neither of them is Egyptian. In our case, if we can understand the ideas of political parties running for office, then we can criticize either side. And we can do it from both their position or from our own, or even some completely different third perspective. But notice that these would be completely different kinds of criticisms because we're coming at it from different angles of what the words are supposed to convey. Our other word in the chapter is wu wei. A problem that we face is that we often project our ideas onto the world. We imagine that we know what's going on and don't bother looking at what's actually there. And that's fine when you're dealing with the kinds of things that you do a million times a day, where you don't have to pay any attention because it's the same mechanical action over and over, like washing dishes. But with claims, we're not dealing with the same old often enough that we should actually always assume that we don't know what's happening. And that way we actually do pay attention and see whether our preconceived ideas match reality or if something else is the case. A great example of this that you may have seen is when a person with dietary restrictions, whether it's medical or religious, goes to a new store. Normally, you would see them just walk up to products and get what they need, but now, because it's a different set of brands, they don't know what they can and can't eat. So now they actually have to check the labels on everything. The automatic selection isn't going to work for them because something there is new, and so they have to pay attention. If we are not emotionally or morally unstable, we should be able to seriously criticize our own side when they make bad arguments. And we should be able to admit when the other side makes a good point, because we are looking at ideas, not at people or political parties. And this is why we need to get our emotions under control and let reason run the show. It is also why we have to assume that the speaker is being honest and trying to communicate something important, and that just because they may use terms differently than we would, it doesn't mean that the idea they're presenting is inherently wrong. So hopefully you can see how all three sections so far have tied together. How the role of reason and emotion has played its role all the way through context. How the structure of an argument keeps bringing us back to the ideas that we need to look for. And finally, how context is supposed to clarify ideas for us. Now, if you have comments, questions, or concerns, as always, leave it down below. Share, like, subscribe, and all the other good things. Thank you.